The very first stage of gain staging in your Studio One projects actually happens outside of Studio One itself when you set your input gain while recording. Now usually this is going to happen these days on your audio interface. I'm recording this acoustic guitar here at the moment, and as you can see it's creating a nice healthy looking waveform. But what do I mean by healthy looking? Well, in order to demonstrate that, let's look at two other extremes. I'm going to go to my audio interface and turn the gain down very, very low. And that's reflected in the waveform here in the way you may expect. We'll talk about why this can be problematic in just a moment. But first of all, I want to create an example of the other extreme, and I'll turn the gain up pretty high. Now that I've done that, you can see it reflected in the waveform with it being kind of squared off at the top and the bottom. Now, why are these two bad? Well, in order to demonstrate that, we're going to have to stop recording and take a look at some playback. Now what I'm going to do is actually split these into three different areas. We've got our healthy area at the beginning, we've got our low gain recording in the middle, and then we've got our high gain recording. And I'm going to color code these for you to make it easier to see what's going on. So I'll make this last one red here. Now if I go ahead and play the low gain recording, well, unsurprisingly it's going to sound quiet, yeah, like this. Now the problem I'm going to have while mixing is I'm going to have to push the fader up really, really high in order to be able to hear this instrument above the others. And I'm probably just going to run out a fader, to be honest with you. So a fix for that would be to increase the actual gain on the event itself. I can do that by grabbing one of these little handles that we can see as we hover over this and just pushing it upwards. And I'll just do that a few times until visually this waveform kind of matches the green healthy one. Yeah, so let's have a listen to the green one first, that's the healthy recording, and then have a listen to our yellow one, the adjusted low gain recording. And they sound very, very similar. So this would be a fix for a low gain recording. Now there are some things I want to caution with this. It depends why it was a low gain recording. If, for example, it was low because you're recording, I don't know, an electric guitar with a very low output, there are some dangers involved here. There may be things like line noise or interference. And as you increase the event gain here, you're also going to increase those noise levels. Now, these days, that's not normally a problem, but it's just worth considering. And it's one of the reasons why I'd rather just record at a healthy level to begin with, and it saves that extra step. Now, let's look at the last example here with everything in red. Well, can we fix this one simply by doing the same thing, grabbing the gain control here for the event and dragging it down? Let's see. Well, immediately we can see a problem. The actual shape of the waveform is quite different. It's still squared off at the top and the bottom. We weren't capturing those loud parts that kind of went above a particular level. It was being clipped or cut off. Now, we've turned it down, but does it sound any good? Well, let's have a listen and see. And right away you can hear the answer is no. It sounds like absolute garbage. Now the thing is this clipping here didn't happen in Studio One. It happened on my audio interface because I set the gain level too high. And Studio One simply captured that. It captured all of that distortion and that awful noise there. And put simply, we just can't really fix this without re-recording the guitar. So I would say when you're setting gain at this gain stage, it's better to set it a little bit too quiet than it is to set it too loud. When it's too quiet, in most cases, you can actually repair that by adjusting the gain on the event itself. But when it's too loud, it's too late. You can't fix it. Now there's many other stages in Studio One itself where we will be trying to get a healthy gain level. So let's look at them. This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Follow the VIP link in the description down below to get 7% off an already amazing price to distribute your music to the world. We already touched upon the next gain stage earlier when we adjusted the level or the gain of our event. If you recall, when we hover over an event, this handle appears in the middle and we can drag it up and down to adjust that gain. That affects the whole event. However, we can also automate the gain on an event by making use of gain envelopes. So if we right click on the event, we can turn on its gain envelope like so, and then this line appears in the middle. We can add points to that line and then drag them around, and that will, as you can see, adjust the gain. We can also do this for kind of regions or areas. Now we do this by hovering our mouse kind of halfway up the top half until it turns into a cross, and then we just drag it out to highlight a particular area. We then move our mouse cursor to the top, and then you can see this horizontal beam has appeared there, and we can drag that up and down to adjust the gain for that particular area. Now this is extremely useful if you want to make sure your gain is at the right level before you hit any plugins, because all of this is happening before our signal gets to our channel in the mix console. The next gain stage in Studio One may be hidden to you, so let me show you how to unhide it. In your mix console, go to the spanner over here on the left hand side, click on that, and then just make sure input controls is selected. And if that's selected, you will see a little gain control at the top of your channel. Now this doesn't do anything particularly different to adjusting the event gain as we did earlier, and also you may think it's a little bit useless because you can't even automate this if you're using automation on the channel. It's a static control. However, I do actually make use of this myself, especially when I'm working with buses. We're going to talk about that later. In my opinion, the most significant gain stage in Studio One is each and every time you add a plugin to a channel. This is easily overlooked and, in my opinion, can create the most havoc in your mixes if you don't maintain it properly. Now that doesn't mean always making an adjustment, but it means at least considering what's happening with your gain at these stages. Now with this acoustic guitar, I've inserted two stock plugins, the Pro EQ3 and the compressor. They both have output gain controls. The Pro EQ3's control is over here, it's called gain, and on the compressor it's called makeup gain over here. But I'm not going to be adjusting the gain for this example in order to demonstrate what problems can occur if you don't. Let's start off by bypassing both of these plugins and playing a small snippet of this guitar to see where the peak is currently at. And you can see it was around about -4 decibels or so. So let's go ahead and switch on our EQ. I've only made a couple of simple moves here. I've done a low cut, which is very typical, and I've just done a little cut in the middle to some of the mid frequencies. Let's see how those two adjustments have affected that peak gain. So you can see it got to around about -6. So we've lost about 2 decibels of gain there. Not a real biggie in the whole scheme of things. However, you'll see in a moment how this can really start to build up from one plugin to another. I'll bypass the EQ and I'll turn on the compressor, and I'll just see where our peak level is at after this compressor. And it's now at around about -7 or so. So we've lost about 3 decibels with some very sort of modest compression settings, I have to say. Now what happens when we switch both of them on? Well, we'll play it again. And you can see we're down to around about -8.3, almost 8.5 decibels of gain reduction by using these two plugins. Now, as you're making adjustments to these, your ears may not even pick up on those gain differences, but as you can see, there is a cumulative effect. Now what will normally happen, or the byproduct of this if you don't manage it within the plugins or between the plugins, is you'll end up sort of pushing that fader up. Now let me know in the comments if this is a position you often find yourself in, where everything seems to creep up and up with your faders in your mix. Now, it may be that some plugins will add a lot of gain and you find yourself with your faders going down further and further. I personally think it's best to be mixing with your faders somewhere around about 0, not too far off, and we'll talk about why later on. But if this is something that happens to you quite often, then you probably just need to take note of any gain changes that are happening with each plugin. Now, with some particular types of plugins, the level going into them is highly significant. In order to demonstrate to you the effects of gain on some particular types of plugins, I've set up this very simple experiment. What I'm currently playing is just a sine wave. You can't hear it because they're incredibly annoying to listen to, but you can see it on this spectrum analyzer over here. And basically, it's a very simple tone, and it's useful because we can visually see how it gets changed by other plugins. Now, I've got two plugins inserted first in my chain, which are identical. They're both the Mix Tool plugin. This is a stock plugin with Studio One, and I'm essentially using it to adjust gain before we go into our main plugin here, which is Universal Audio's 1176 compressor. Now, this is a classic compressor, and many people will use this to add kind of character or flavor, as well as doing compression to their signal. Now, we'll see that character in just a moment when we switch it on, and then we'll adjust the gain to see how that also affects the character. So we'll switch it on, and you can see right away how things have changed. Apart from our initial sine wave, we've also got a couple of additions here. These are harmonics, and these are really a big part of the character of these types of old hardware emulations. Now, if I push the output only of this plugin like so, you can see that yes, things get louder, but the character hasn't changed all that much. We've got our initial sine wave, we've got our two harmonics. So I'll put that back to where it was before. Now, what happens if I now go ahead and adjust the input gain? Well, I'm going to do that by adjusting the first of our Mix Tool plugins. I'll push it up, and it doesn't take long before you see the actual character has changed. Yeah, we haven't just got those two harmonics, we've got a whole bunch of other harmonics as well. Now, as I push this gain even further, not only do we have those additional harmonics, but their relationship to each other changes a little bit. The level of each harmonic in comparison to the others is changing a little bit here. Now, if I make use of my second mix tool to really push the gain up really high, uncomfortably high if we were listening to it, then you can start to see the actual distribution or the character of each harmonic has changed. So in this case now, we've got our initial sine wave. Our first harmonic is here, but then there's this sudden dip to our second harmonic, and then it goes back up again for the third harmonic. So the character of the harmonics being added is being changed simply by adding more or less gain. So the amount of gain, the actual level, does matter when you're going into these types of plugins. Now, the actual level may differ from one plugin to another, depending on the character of the hardware which is being emulated. But one thing I think is really important to understand, if you're using these plugins sometimes and you're thinking, I'm not really hearing any change in character at all, it may simply be that you're just not driving them hard enough, that you've got the gain down a little bit too low, and you're not really just pushing them hard enough to introduce that character. Our next gain stage can be a source of confusion. I'm talking about the send level that we have on channels when we're sending a signal from that channel to a bus, for example. You can see me adjusting one here. Now, the point of confusion is this. Often we're balancing the level between our original source and the bus, and it can feel like we can do that in one of two places and it doesn't matter. One is from the send level and the other one is the output or the fader on the bus. And for a lot of effects that we may use on that bus, for example reverb, we probably wouldn't hear much difference whether we use that fader or we use the send level. But for some types of plugins, especially those like the ones we discussed in the last section. It can make a huge difference. Now, I've set up an extreme example here to really make this very clear to you. I've got this clean electric guitar and it's being sent through to this bus which has an amp sim on it. I wouldn't normally set up an amp sim in this way, but it's good for this experiment so you can hear the difference it makes. And that amp sim is designed to be overdriving that guitar. So let's just have a quick listen to what we've got at the moment. So a nice overdriven guitar, and we can see that the send level is pretty high. But what if I turn the send level down and then I push the fader on the bus up? Have a listen to the difference. Okay, so we've simply got quite a clean sounding guitar, and the reason for that is this send level is actually acting like an input gain for this amp sim. We're adjusting the level of input being sent to the bus, and in turn that's the first signal that hits the amp sim, and if it's not being driven hard enough it simply won't break up, it won't overdrive. Now in this case, when we're setting it up so it is being overdriven, if we turn the fader down, have a listen to that. We can hear it's being overdriven, but it's simply quieter. So the fader now acts as, well, what it is, an output level control. It doesn't change the character of the sound, it just changes the volume. Whereas the send level is definitely going to be changing the character of the sound. Our next gain stage is the humble fader. We can think of this as the kind of output level for the channel that we're working on. Now, probably the most important thing to understand about a fader is its non-linear nature. What do I mean by that? Well, it's got a higher resolution up here than it does down here. Again, what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look at the distance we have to move the fader to get, say, 6 decibels of difference, yeah? Look at that distance there, yeah? It's around about 6 decibels. But further down here, the same distance, and we're adjusting the level by about 12 decibels, twice as much. And it changes even further as we go further down here. In other words, it's much more difficult to make fine adjustments to the level when you've got the fader down the bottom than it is when we've got it further up the top. And that's why it's kind of desirable to get your levels at a reasonable level so your fader's not always hanging around down at the bottom here. And that's going to be affected by all of the gain staging that you've done up until this point. Now, gain staging doesn't necessarily end with the fader of each channel. That signal's got to go somewhere. Often it will go through to the master bus, but sometimes it will be sent somewhere else, like a regular bus. And that's what I've done here for this experiment. I took the original guitar that we'd recorded and I duplicated it 8 times, and I sent all of those 8 guitars through to this bus in green. So let's start off by taking a look at what's happening. As I play this track, you can see that each of the individual guitar tracks has a nice healthy signal. It's not clipping at all, it's not going up above 0. But when they combine together and go through to the bus, then you can see our level is right up in the red. I think we're clipping there by around about sort of 10 decibels or so. Now, what may be confusing to you, if this ever happens to you in your projects, is the fact that you probably can't hear that happening. Let's have a listen to it now. Now, the reason you can't hear that clipping there is basically because of the technology involved with our recording here. I'm going to put this very simply. DAWs like Studio One and paired together with modern audio interfaces can cope with a very high dynamic range, meaning they can cope with very quiet to very loud signals without any distortion during playback. And that's all fine when you're in Studio One. But there is a couple of reasons why I still manage the gain here and actually turn it down and make it healthy again. Now, one of them we're going to touch upon later when we talk about output or export. But for now, let's just talk about the fact that as we put plugins perhaps on this bus, that signal may be just super loud for those plugins. So they may not behave in the way we want them to at all. So that might be the first reason why I would grab this gain control up here and pull it down to get that signal at a nice healthy level again. Now the other thing is that some, especially older plugins, may not actually have the same dynamic range in their processing as our DAW does, so they may not be able to cope with such loud signals without distortion. Granted, that's a kind of a rare case scenario, but that's enough combined to make me still be a little bit old-fashioned and manage this signal. So even though I'm not hearing a problem, I'm still going to manage that gain there. Now in a moment, we're going to talk about where these high gain levels do become a problem. Now I'd like to remind you at this point, if you're releasing your music to places like Spotify, Amazon, Google Play, etc., don't forget to follow the link in the description down below to our sponsor DistroKid. If you follow that link, you'll get 7% off your first year of membership. Now talking about releasing your music, to do that, you're going to have to export your track, and that's where the levels that you send to your master bus become really important, because earlier, for example, we were looking at playing the track and it was kind of clipping here on the bus, and it wasn't a problem in terms of when we were listening to it. It sounded nice and clean still, but that's not going to be the case if you're clipping the master bus like we can see we're doing here. Then you will be able to hear the clipping. Now in order to demonstrate this to you, I've already done an export of this project, and I've already brought in the output of that and imported it into this project. So I'll unhide that track now so that you can actually see it. It's in red, of course, and we'll solo that track and then we'll have a listen, and you can hear what this guitar sounds like when the master bus is clipping. So the lesson here is, yes, you can take some liberties with clipping when you're doing all kinds of gain staging at different stages of your project, but not when it comes to the master bus. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I'm Mike. I hope you're well, and I'll see you in the next video.